Sinead's short film Lamb, which was entered into Tribeca Film Festival. Congratulations. Thanks for taking time to talk with me today about this thrilling little horror short. I loved it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, and thank you so much for your review. It was really great. It's just nice to be able to finally talk about the film.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. It was thrilling and it was creepy in its own way. For horror fans like myself, it felt a little bit like a fresh take on a familiar stalker trope. You wrote and directed it, so talk a little bit about how you came up with the idea for the plot.
Sure. So I suppose the short version is it was kind of the image of the guy at the back door. But I suppose the longer story is I live in a rural area, like I'm from a rural area. It wouldn't be as remote as the house in the film, but remote enough. And I was at home a few years ago in my family home, and my parents were away for the weekend, and I kind of realized it was my first time to stay in my family home on my own. And one of the things we do at home in the summer is we would leave the back door and often the front door just open. And I kind of, it was a really hot day and I wanted to do that. And I just, for the first time, I was kind of like aware of my safety, which is really annoying because I think, as a woman, you're very aware of your safety in general. And I lived in Dublin City for years, and you kind of think it's normal to be a little bit more safety conscious, but I kind of was really annoyed that even in my own family home where I've always felt safe, I was second guessing, could I leave the door open or what would I do? So I suppose from a story point of view, it was always, because when you're going to write a film, it goes back to the story, is this interesting? Are the characters interesting? What happens is interesting. So I think it kind of sparked that whole what would you do if kind of conversation. So it's very much stayed at that stage for a while. Like I remember when I told the cinematographer about the initial idea, I didn't have the ending yet. I just had the layout of the room, and that he would appear when her back was turned and that he would be closer to the child than she was. So it was kind of just playing with that, and then it kind of just went from there.
You mentioned that you were at your parents' home, a similar setting. The shot, it was a beautiful scenery. It was this remote cottage, and it made me feel like it was a breath of fresh, flowery air, but then there was something lurking amongst the weeds, and it really added for me to the horror aspect of it, because you do feel safe there and you don't know what's out there. Was that location always what you had in mind because you had that idea from your parents' home?
Yeah, for sure. I've always been interested in that. Like I love shows like Top of the Lake and things like that, where you've got these like stunningly beautiful places, but because they're so isolated, like they're incredibly beautiful and unspoiled and all the rest of it. But at the same time, there can be alienation and there can be dark things happening that people don't see and things like that. So yeah, I always wanted it to be like that, and you picked up on it really well in the review as well, that the idea that it's absolutely beautiful, but at the same time, like it's both. That's what always interested me about it. It's beautiful, but that can also mean that bad things can happen unseen, that kind of way. And also the theme of nature, as in like nature is like that as well, as far as I'm concerned too. It's beautiful, but it's brutal. And so it's that idea, and having the house near woodland was very important to me, because kind of felt like they were almost competing with each other. And we had like a backstory about how Aoife would have ended up, or sorry, Eva's the actress, how Sarah would have ended up living there, that she's on the edge of what is a wild or natural place. So I kind of like that tension. So it was hard to find a location that matched what we were looking for, there was a shortage of locations at the time that we shot, with COVID and everything. But when we found it, yeah, we were really, really happy that it was exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, I think it was really effective. You filmed the whole thing in the kitchen. It's where the characters sort of their beginning and end happens. Was there ever an option to leave that kitchen, go out beyond the open door and the breakfast toast, you venture out into those woods that's sort of lurking with the unknown?
Yeah, for sure. It was different for me writing this than anything I've written before, because I got to a point where I was like, okay, you're going to have to concentrate on, ending it essentially, because I spent so long on the dialogue between them and how it would kind of how the stakes would be raised gradually, and how she would respond to that. And I kind of enjoyed it. It was different. I kind of like went through every possible ending that I could think of, and obviously one of them was that she would get out of the house, or she would like grab the child and, you know, run, like all the different endings. But for me, especially in short film, I think you can kind of do that as well. I liked the challenge of keeping it in the one space, but also, you know, the decision that she makes at the end, and I don't want to spoil the ending, but you know, I guess for me, it's kind of like the decision she makes is that it's whatever's going to happen, you know, like I always think, I make a joke out of it, but like I think, you know, that whole thing about don't go to the second location, you know, I think that she would know that once she leaves the house that she, you know, anything could happen, but you know, I like, it's just too unknown to her. So I think that that's why she kind of, you know, doesn't want it to go that far, you know.
That's actually
but
really...
from a story. No, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that's actually a really good point about not going to the second location, because I did have that fear for her. Once she goes beyond that door, what's next, you know? And keeping it vague, I thought was very effective.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, from a story point of view, I really liked it. But I mean, you know, my cinematographer was asking me at the time, he was like, would you think you could make a feature out of it? And I was like, yeah, but I think they definitely have to leave the kitchen. It's a bit too
well, you know, like setting the mood is such an integral part of filmmaking, especially with the thriller horror genres. Some of the shots you chose really set the mood of an uneasy feeling that's kind of building. For example, the blurry entrance of Paul as he slips in the kitchen behind Sarah when she's not paying attention immediately set the mood that everything is shifting. Everything's shifted completely. And the unknown, the blurriness, the unknown is really what gripped me. What can you talk about some of the cinematography choices that you made with the cinematography?
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, I'm very fortunate. My cinematographer, Dan, and I have worked on all of our films, and, you know, he's the first person that I told about the idea. So, and so we've had a long time to discuss it. And you see, my background is actually theater, and one of the great things about working with Dan is like he'll put the visual language on what I'm talking about. So I'll go to him with, like, you know, the sense that I want, or the atmosphere and the ideas, and he'll translate that for me, or he'll come back to me and say like, what about this, or what? And obviously the shortcut with that is that we just watched a lot of film, like, you know, we just referencing. So like we would have watched, I remember we were very fortunate that our film was funded by Screen Ireland, which is the national funder in Ireland, and I for film, and I know that other countries don't have that, but it's a competitive process to apply for the funding. And when we went to go for our interview, we would have made a sizzle reel, and like that would have had like funny games and Mindhunter and, you know, particular shots, you know, in that. So I don't know whether it's because we're kind of alike anyway, or whether it's because we've worked together so long, but we kind of were talking about the same thing from the get-go. Like the whole thing about raising the tension, but also the idea of it being a game. And the idea that once we got at the table, I very much wanted it to mimic, I wanted the audience to feel how I thought she would be feeling throughout the whole thing. So the idea that once he enters the space, it becomes smaller. Once she sits down at the table, it's even smaller. And obviously that in shots, you know, you're going with the tighter shots. And Dan would have said from the get-go that, like, you know, the idea, you know, he had references from the master, you know, that she's kind of not dominating her own frame, and he's, you know, so like we were all over it from the get-go. And then because of COVID, we actually ended up having a good few years to talk about it. So by the time we shot it, you know, thankfully everything kind of translated from what we discussed on day one, you know.
It was very theatrical. You said you had a theater background. I thought the dialogue was very theatrical. I could see it being a one-act play even. Did you have a backstory for the characters, and did you share it with the actors when they got on set so they kind of knew where they were coming from? Because a lot of the tension exists behind the words that they're saying. They're both playing a game, you know? And so their truth is not in the words, but behind those words. So you must have had sort of like a character Bible that you created for them, or something similar.
Sure. I mean, again, when we were applying for, I mean, I would kind of know these things, but applying for the funding meant that I wrote them down. So I had my writer's notes and stuff when we were going through the pre-production phase. But when I again, because we got funding, I had the luxury of having rehearsal with the actors, and obviously we had a great cast. So when you have a great cast, I mean, you're already like, you know, it's already such a I don't know, like you're already starting on such a solid foundation. But when we did do our rehearsal, I had the writer's notes for each character. So I would have had a character bio, but I think this is where it's advantageous when, and also I suppose it's, I don't know really, because I've always directed my own work, but I think once you put your director's hat on and you're in the room with the actors, you kind of have to hand it over to them. And so I didn't share it with them. I asked them if they wanted it, but then we both kind of were like, I don't know if it's useful, because they, you know, it's whatever process they want to arrive at, and then I can support them to arrive at as a director in terms of what's believable or what's true. And you know, and directing is pretty much, especially with actors, it's pretty much just figuring out what their process is and trying to support them through that. So like we had long conversations about it, but I saw my writer's notes as kind of like a starting point, but really once they took on a character, they had to kind of come to their own conclusions. And I, you know, and I answered any questions, or, you know, was open to conversation about anything. I think in particular with Aoife's character, Sarah, like I was very, obviously the psychology of Paul is much more, you know, complex, and you know, and Aine is very thorough, and, you know, really kind of went into the psychology of it, and we were really kind of talking about that for quite a long time. With Sarah, what I really didn't want, and Aoife felt the same way, is I didn't want it to be like, you know, washing powder commercial before Paul arrived. Like it needed to be a realistic, you know, a lot of my friends have kids, and, you know, it's not all fun and games, and she's not going to be bright and breezy. Like, you know, she's got her own stuff going on. The fact that her husband goes away to work during the week must be really difficult. Perhaps she's feeling a bit alienated and lonely anyway. Like, you know, you need to give them something to sink their teeth into, even if, as you say, that's not necessarily going to be spoken about. They need to, you know, that needs to be there in order for them to step into whatever happens in the 15 minutes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And I felt that. I felt like they had a strong sense of who their characters were, even though we didn't get that info as a viewer. I thought the performances were compelling. Did you have a hand in casting? Were you able to go through that casting with the process? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky again because I kind of had an idea. I've always wanted to work with Aoife, who played Sarah, because of my theater background, I'd seen her in at least 5 or 6 different productions. She's, you know, she's quite prominent in theater over in Ireland, and I always thought she was a great actress, and I always really admired her. But she always reminded me of the type of women that I grew up with, you know. And I was saying this in Tribeca, but she has this kind of mix of real like vulnerability and fierceness that I really liked. I have to give the credit for, so I approached, you know, it was really Aoife in my mind. So thankfully she agreed. So I didn't do like an open casting for that. With Aine, like originally when I wrote it, I actually had the idea that Paul would be older, like in his 30s, but as it developed, it just didn't make sense to me anymore. And it seemed even more like enraging that a younger guy would do it, that he would have the audacity to like walk into this woman's house. But when it came to younger actors, I would be less familiar with the actors, you know, on the circuit in Ireland, you know, because of my age, probably I wasn't going to see as much shows, but also because of COVID. And thankfully my producer suggested Aine. She had seen him in a showcase of the Lear Academy where he studied. And I met with him online because of COVID, and I was just really impressed with him. And then when I saw the two of them together, I just thought we finally got a physical reading with the two of them together, and it just had to be him, you know.
Yeah, I thought they had incredible chemistry. At least the tension wise, it was really compelling. You know, it shorts, even though the word is short next to the film, it does take hours and days and months of planning and filming and all of these things. How did you keep that intensity up with the actors on set? Because after so many hours, I'd imagine that, you know, you get a little bit used to each other, you get a little bit comfortable, but you needed that tension to stay through the entire time. So how did you keep that in mind for them?
I think for sure, moving from theater to film, the one thing that I was always in awe of was the actors, because I think in my head I had this idea that film would be easier for actors because they, you know, they get to like break it up and they don't have to do like one, you know, live performance. But actually it's really challenging from my viewpoint because they are often shooting things out of order. They're asked to like drop into things emotionally, like, you know, like that. They're often interrupted because of technical reasons. And so I have to give most of the credit to the actors. Like they were just able to drop back into it really quickly and you know, seamlessly. The other side of it is that it actually was a very intense shoot because we had like twin babies on set, and again, I can't blame anyone for this because I wrote the script, but we're quite restricted with their time on set. So they could only be on set between 9:30 and 4:30, and they could only ever be on set, I'm pretty sure it was 30 minutes at a time. So and we were supposed to shoot over 3 days, but because of crew availability and different factors, it was 2. And I suppose it's kind of like there was all of this going on, and we were just, you know, because the baby's in so many of the shots as well, there wasn't a huge amount you could do outside of those hours. So our shoot days were actually kind of short, you know what I mean? So that kind of, I think, naturally led to a sense of urgency amongst us, especially on the last day. But yeah, I mean, most of that is just the actors, their ability just to switch into it. And it is fascinating to watch because Aina, you know, was amazing with the children, because obviously he actually handles the child a lot in the film. And you know, there was days where the children weren't having it, or they were grumpy or whatever. He has lots of nieces and nephews, so he used to be outside playing with the kids and their mum, and the mother would like hand him the baby and they'd be playing this game, and then he would pretend to be an airplane with the baby and literally walk into the set, sit down with the baby and just start acting. That's how we had to do it sometimes. And he was just able to drop from playing with the baby to being a horrible man, you know, and he was just able to do it like that.
They always say that babies and dogs are the most unpredictable to have on set. You're definitely got your work cut out for you. So I applaud you to a set of twins and trying to film around their schedule. And of course, their random behaviors. You know, it's a lot of challenging, yeah. I think, I think that's a great story, though. You know, the instinct to protect one's child is such a natural response for mothers. Staying calm in the face of a threat, I think, is a talent shared by all women worldwide, regardless if they're mothers. Was there a message that you were trying to tell in this story?
I don't think so. I think for me, it always goes back to the writing, as in like I want it to be a really interesting story. I think like themes and stuff kind of emerge, like, you know, when you've written something, you've come up with an idea, and then you're asked, you know, whether it's for an application or because you're submitting it to a festival, somebody's actually like, yeah, but you know, what are the themes of the piece, whatever. They don't tend to come up when you're preparing it, but they kind of come out when you've finished it. So I suppose I've always been very interested in like, for me, I suppose there's an awful lot of like, there's no physical violence in the piece, and I thought that was interesting, because for me the violence is as soon like I was interested in the psychology of it, as in like the violence happens as soon as he invades her space, her home, you know, like that's a violent act. And I was interested in the fact that like women are so much more aware of their safety, and they're also become, and that takes a psychological toll on women, you know, like you're constantly thinking, what if, you know, like, oh, I could walk home, but what if this happened, or I could do that, but what if. And so it, like, you know, I think there's a toll that takes, and then how you react. I was curious about how you react, like myself and Aoife used to have this conversation the whole time. If at any point he had left, so let's say she had given him, you know, some food and he had left, people would probably turn around and say, well, why did you do that? Or why didn't you scream? Or why didn't you, you know, shout at him? Or why didn't you throw, like, why did you give it? Like, you know, I've always been interested as to how the burden would be on her as to what she didn't do, rather than what this guy did and why he felt entitled to be able to do so, you know. And so I've always been curious about those type of dynamics, and how you could see her as you know, I mean, everybody, it's such a cliche now, but you know, trauma but like, you know, what you're watching is a moment of trauma kind of unraveling, and she's going through these different stages that I find are really interesting, because like everybody knows the ones, you know, where you would react with violence, like fight or whatever, and you know, there's so many like stuff that just, you know, that's it. It's like, you know, he did this to her, and then she was gone. It's like, but like, you know, the negotiation that happens when you're trying to manage yourself in your responses, and then manage, you know, but they're all about survival. Like, even if she's making him toast, it's not because, you know, she thinks she should make him, it's because she thinks if she does this, he might leave. And it's, you know, when she's nice to him, it's not because she's not standing up for herself, it's because she's making continuous assessments as to what's the safest thing for me to do here in order to get me and my child out of this situation. I just was always interested in that because and that's why, again, I kind of stuck to my guns with the ending as well, because and you picked up on this in your review. It's like, you know, like we can all imagine what might happen, and as women, I think in particular, we imagine what would happen in, you know, negatively. Like we imagine our own deaths, like, you know, a lot, which is kind of scary when you think about it, you know. And we sometimes even do it to each other. It's like, did you walk home alone last night? But what if this had happened? Or, you know, that taxi driver was so weird. Like, what if he had done this? And it's like, you know, that takes its toll. So I just, all of those things were interesting to me, but I wouldn't want to say that I picked an issue or I wanted to have this message. All I can hope for is I think this is a really good story, and I, you know, have done the best I can to kind of get that across. And that's why it's amazing to be able to share it with audiences, because when reviewers and audiences respond to it and they're picking up on things that you kind of hoped they would, then you're like, okay, maybe it's working, you know.
I feel like all women were Sarah for a minute, because we are all trained to sort of negotiate uncomfortable situations to get ourselves out of it. We're always, you know, oftentimes pleasant, trying to make people feel comfortable, to make us safer or comfortable. I felt like a unity with her, and I understood why she was sort of being nice to him and trying to really read the room. And I found her character very strong, regardless of what you thought maybe she should or shouldn't do. I found her strength very appealing. You know, you mentioned the vague climactic finale, which I absolutely loved. I thought it was compelling. I was thinking about it hours afterwards, and what would I do? And what do I think that she did? And oh my God, you know, what about the baby? You know, all of these things were going through my head. When you wrote it, did you have sort of an idea of what happened outside? And did you really have to force yourself to keep it vague? Because I would think, even as a writer, certainly as a viewer, I wanted to know. I wanted to see. I wanted to have some sort of settling feeling at the end, but I was left unsettled, which I think was a really great way to leave it, but I still had questions.
Sure. No, I mean, we've talked again, because we ended up having such a long pre-production period as well. Like, and, you know, we went through various interviews to secure the funding, you know, and it's good that it's kind of put to you, but we would have had long conversations about it. The only thing that I can kind of say is I've only kind of realized this by making stuff, but I work, I think, first and foremost, like intuitively as a writer, as in, like, I can't sometimes explain why, but I'll know when something feels right. And I was very surprised when that ending felt right to me, because I would never want it to be a situation where I felt an audience were cheated, or I felt like it was lazy, or like some sort of gimmicky ending in doing what we did, because I won't talk about it just to people who still watch it. But I guess for me, and then I really questioned myself about it, because I was like, okay, this is not what I thought I would be drawn to, but it feels right. So then I was like, why does it feel right? I suppose the easiest way that I can or say it, I kind of mentioned this in Tribeca as well, is that, like, for me, it was the closest ending that I felt I could still give her hope in, because the way that it ends, it's, you know, it's both situations, if you know what I mean. And so it's like, yeah, for me, and then also visually, I wanted to end it so that the last time you see him, he's being disempowered. The last time you see her, she is taking her power back. And that to me felt like it needed more priority, or that should be the focus rather than anything else. And, you know, I mean, even within that, you know, because you write the script and then you direct it, but then you go into the post, you know, the edit, even within that, there was still a lot of decisions how to end it, because, you know, you could cut away very quickly, or you could, there was a few options, but yeah, it just felt right, you know. And but I mean, you still went in holding your breath to the first couple of screenings, and, you know, waiting to see what people thought. But thankfully, people seem to have responded very well to it, you know.
Yeah, I gasped at the end. The final seconds, I found myself just going, oh! And then kind of negotiating in my own head of what I was hoping happened. You know, I was like, oh gosh, I hope that happened. I hope, you know, it left me with a really uncomfortable feeling, which I think was maybe what you were hoping to get by for viewers, because That's certainly what Sarah was feeling. And I felt like her at the end a little bit.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah, definitely. One kind of thing that I wasn't expecting was when I watched it both times in Tribeca, I actually found myself getting quite emotional at the end. And I've seen it a million times and stuff, because I suppose that I was remembering that when we shot the last scenes, that in order for Aoife was kind of getting herself into the zone, and we were saying, this is potentially the last time that she's going to see her, and stuff like that. And it was very so when I watch it now, I find it very emotional. But that's because since we shot it, obviously the music is amazing and the editor was amazing, so it's just elevated the whole thing. So yeah, it's that surprised me too.
You're an up and coming filmmaker. What would you say is the number one challenge for new filmmakers in the business? And do you have any advice for people trying to break into the business? Obviously, you had help. Ireland gave you some funding. We don't obviously have that in the United States. But if you had any advice for up and coming filmmakers and what you found to be your biggest challenge as a new filmmaker.
Sure. I suppose, I didn't really I suppose I almost like transferred into the industry. So I suppose I kind of felt almost a double outsider because I hadn't studied film in school or anything like that. So I think the advice that I got before that I really valued and I have found to be true is that you kind of surround yourself with good people. And I think the vast majority of especially short filmmakers or indie filmmakers or people who are just trying to make stuff are really nice and welcoming and really lovely. And so it's just kind of like, trying to find your tribe, I guess, the people that will always, and for me, I worked with Dan on my first short, and then I worked with Killian. Dan and Killian have Arcade Film, and they've always been such great collaborators and supporters of mine. Like anytime I go to them with an idea, they always just say, yeah, we're in, and like, that's really nice. And then, we were very fortunate to get the funding for Lamb, which meant that I could work with a producer and a bigger crew, and you're kind of upping your game. And that's good. I suppose, yeah, it's like surrounding yourself with good people, but also nobody knows what they're doing. I have to say that is true. The older I get, and like nobody is 100% confident. Like you're supposed to be pushing yourself, and I've always tried to push myself with every short, whether it's working with for my second short, we approached a Tony Award-winning actress who I've always loved, and but she said yes, you know what I mean? And for Lamb, we had a bigger budget, so we had a bigger crew and we could up our game. And so when you're upping your game and you're pushing yourself, you're not always going to feel comfortable or sure, but if you've got good people in your corner and you kind of stick to your guns, and it'll all work out and you'll have a bit of fun along the way, hopefully.
Hopefully. Now that the film was presented at Tribeca, what's next for Lamb and you? Are there any plans to distribute it for streaming that other fans that didn't go to Tribeca or saw it online can see it? And are you working on any other projects that we can keep an eye out for?
Oh, sure. So with Lamb, I mean, that was kind of our kickoff event. So we're having our Irish premiere next week, actually, in Galway. So we're kind of just working out a strategy at the moment, but the usual way would be that we would I think we would prioritize getting into festivals for the next year, and then definitely putting it online when it feels appropriate, for it to make that. Because I mean, especially with COVID and everything, online streamers are, you reach such a large audience. It's great. But I would like to, especially because I didn't, we were all shut up for so long. I'm actually really looking forward to traveling with it as much as I can, because festivals are really good fun. It's such a nice way to meet people and to actually be in a room with an audience, and the way your work should be seen as well. And then in terms of what I'm working on, I'm going to enjoy the festival run for a little bit. But I just finished my first feature screenplay with Copper Alley Productions, which is great. So we're probably going to try and get some funding to develop that a little bit further. And I also have a feature film version of my second short, Stray, which we're really hoping to get off the ground as well. So the next year is kind of maybe trying to make the launch into a feature film. But I also during lockdown had a really crazy idea about I think it's more kind of Lamb-esque, as in like it's about a pregnant woman who's like, I'm quite excited about it, but I haven't written it yet. So that's why you always get most excited about the idea that you don't have to deliver. But it's about a pregnant woman who's like, she's kind of isolated during lockdown with her husband and his college friends, and she starts to get really like paranoid that they're trying to kill her. So
oh, well, that sounds fantastic. I'm already excited about it. You haven't even written it yet.
I know.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you. I love the film. I thought it was great. I really want more people to see it because it left me with such a unsettling feeling. And that's what I look for, which is crazy. That's what I look for when it watches. I want to feel something, whether it's an unsettling trauma feeling. And I definitely felt that. Best of luck on the festival circuits. I think it'll do well. I really enjoyed talking with you today. And fans, if you want to see Sinead O'Connor's Lamb, you can see it in Galway, right? It's going to be playing in Galway?
Yeah, it'll be in Galway Film Fleadh on the 9th of July. And who knows after that. But I'm on Instagram, Ned Loughlin Film. I'll post everything up there anyway. And, you know, some of the festivals are still hybrid, so there might be a chance to watch it online as well, you know. Oh,
that's great. I think the fans will really enjoy this. Certainly horror fans. If you watch this, you are going to be locking your door when you are home. There is no doubt about that. Thank you so much, Sinead, for talking with me today. And I wish you the best, and I wish you the best with Lamb. And we talk again in the future, especially when that other piece that you're working on comes out. I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much. Thanks a million for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.